It's hard to describe to somebody without them seeing the transformation that happens in a young person when they start getting paid in Bitcoin and they start for the first time in their life questioning, should I spend it now versus save it for the future? You just see this total transformation in the mindset. It used to be people felt like life was just going to keep getting worse. Now they're just full of hope.
I couldn't imagine what life was like with the gangs, but you've been here 20 years. What's that transformation been like here?
People wouldn't go out on the streets. You'd go out at night and it would be like a ghost town. People wouldn't send their kids to school because that was a place where the gangs would do a lot of recruiting. And so I estimate there was probably about 25,000 youth a year that were joining the gangs. So you look in the past 5 years, you're talking over 100,000 youth who have been kept out of that lifestyle.
Do you have any tips for people that want to start creating their own Bitcoin circular economy in their neighborhood?
Start small, and then whatever you think you want to do, shrink it down like 10% of that size. Of course, we had no idea what we were doing. I thought, we'll talk to other people that are doing things like this. And we got down there and they're like, no, nobody's doing anything like this. You guys are idiots. It'll never work. But we were committed. We were like, we're going to make this work. I get kind of surprised sometimes when I see things on Twitter because I'm like, look around. Like, things are like booming here.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Sovereign Mindset Podcast. Today, we have an absolute legend in the house, in studio. He is the man behind Bitcoin Beach, one of the pioneers who started the whole Bitcoin movement here in El Salvador. Mr. Mike Peterson, thank you for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here with you, Michael. I love the studio. You guys are doing some amazing stuff here. It's fun to see, you come with this idea and what it's turned into.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you. So, Mike, I actually want to start off with something I wrote, and maybe Matthias can put it up on the screen here, but it's something I wrote in 2021. It was a week after the Miami Bitcoin conference, and this is when it was announced that Bitcoin was going to be legal tender in El Salvador. And I said, the biggest highlight of the conference came from an impassioned speech by Jack Mallers. He presented news the president of El Salvador would introduce a bill to Congress making Bitcoin legal tender. It only took a few days for the bill to pass and become law, making it one of the most significant events in Bitcoin's history and elevating the technology to a new level of adoption. What I find incredible is that this monumental geopolitical and economic event started truly from the ground up. One man, Mike Peterson, turned a sleepy beach town into a Bitcoin economic zone, and this got the attention of President Bukele, who became convinced of the merits of Bitcoin and saw an opportunity to bring prosperity to his country by adopting it as legal tender. So that was almost 4 years ago, and I'm just curious, did I get that right? Is that the story behind Bitcoin Beach?
Yeah, the one caveat I would say is it definitely wasn't one man. I mean, I was just part of a team. Without the amazing team that we had, would have just remained a crazy idea. Wouldn't have actually been, actuated and put into action. And so I definitely don't claim credit for making it happen. It was the local team that did that.
And so then could we get into the story of how it all unfolded, Bitcoin Beach, how that idea came to be, and then not only that, the development of the project itself?
Yeah, so I'll take it all the way back. We came down to El Salvador on a surf trip, and I believe it was either 2004, 2005, and fell in love with the country. Called my wife up and said, all right, you got to come back here with me. She didn't come on that surf trip. I said, you got to come back and let's buy a place. And so we came back a couple months later, bought the house we've lived in for the last 20 years. And we decided that this would kind of be our second home in El Salvador. And so for the next 10 years, we would spend a couple months every year down here. We had a seasonal business in the U.S. that gave us flexibility in the winter. And so this became kind of our winter home. And just continue to fall in love with the country, but also see the challenges that they were wrestling with. At that time, it had the highest murder rate in the world. The poverty, the fact that people felt like they couldn't make it in El Salvador. And so the Salvadorans were like growing up in this beautiful place, but having to leave because they felt like they couldn't provide for their kids or couldn't protect their kids. And so we decided that we would actually move down here full time. We were attending a church in San Salvador, that there was a lot of other missionaries there. It was an English speaking church. And so we started seeing people doing kind of amazing work in the country, but really having a rough time. Their kids struggling with the violence, everything. We thought, hey, we don't necessarily feel called to start up something, but let's come down and support all these different organizations that are operating here. And so we moved our family down. My kids, I think at that time, were 6 and 8, and decided to move down and make El Salvador home. And we would just go back to the U.S. We still had the seasonal business. We kind of scaled it back. And so we would go back to, that was kind of how we paid the bills. We'd go back and run our food service business in the U.S. every summer and then come back down. And so that went on for a number of years, and we had local projects both in El Zante and Punta Mongo, and then that's kind of what the Bitcoin Beach project was born out of, one of the local projects. Actually, both of them, because a lot of people don't know this. We actually started the Bitcoin initiative in Punta Mongo, and just because it was so far from where we're living, we decided, okay, let's focus on El Zante first, and we'll do Punta Mongo second. I'm not sure if you've been to Punta Mongo, but it's on the other end of the country. What they're calling Surf City 2, or where if it ever happens, where the Bitcoin City project would be. And so we had a number of things going in the local community because, I'd say probably a third of the kids were joining the gangs. It was kind of like this pathway for a huge portion of them was, okay, there's no jobs or opportunity here, so we'll join the local gang. And so we had this project with the youth, really trying to keep them in school and keep them out of the gangs. And somebody heard about this. They knew that I was a Bitcoiner also. And so they said, hey, maybe this donor that we know that likes to donate in Bitcoin would want to help you guys with this project. And so I was like, yeah, I doubt it, but let's go see. That never hurts to listen to somebody. And went and had this meeting in the U.S. and I wasn't meeting with a donor. They wanted to remain anonymous and have remained anonymous, but kind of heard from the representative that what they had in mind, and they wanted to see a circular Bitcoin economy happen where they wanted to support organizations that weren't just going to take their Bitcoin and convert it to fiat, but somebody that would truly catch the vision of starting a movement where people wouldn't have to convert, where they'd actually just live life in Bitcoin. And they felt like that more than the dollar value was what was most important, was helping people get on a Bitcoin standard. And so, that was kind of the initial. And then, of course, we had no idea what we were doing. I thought, well, we'll go to this conference. It's in Uruguay, the Latin American Bitcoin conference, and we'll talk to other people that are doing things like this. And we got down there and they're like, no, nobody's doing anything like this. You guys are idiots. It'll never work. And, but we were committed. We were like, no, we're going to prove everybody wrong. We're going to make this work. And we actually met some great people at that conference that, even though I think they had their doubts, they're like, yeah, we'll get behind you guys in this effort. And so, kind of just grew from there. I don't know how much details you want to go into about that, but that's kind of the origin story.
Yeah. There's so many different ways we could take this, because I could imagine that in that journey, you've had all these different experiences, for instance, challenges that you've probably gone through, and like even understanding the landscape a little bit. And when I think of it, for instance, with a challenge or understanding landscape, how important is it to be in a country where they do have friendly Bitcoin policies when you want to start a circular economy?
It's helpful for sure. I would say it's definitely not a requirement. We're actually supporting and working with a number of projects around the world, and a lot of them are in countries that are indifferent to very hostile to Bitcoin. And so I wouldn't say that it's a requirement. And actually, when we started in El Salvador, they were not a friendly jurisdiction. They weren't like a hostile jurisdiction, but most people in El Salvador had never even heard of Bitcoin. And so it wasn't something that I think was really on the radar. And we tried to make sure early on to engage the government, not because we wanted to partner with them per se, but just because we wanted them to know, hey, this is what we're about. You don't want there to be rumors, because Bitcoin, especially in those days, was associated with money laundering and drugs and, all this stuff. So we wanted to let them know, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is our motivations. And, as it turns out, it was the perfect place to launch the project because the government's been amazing. And I think they really early on caught the vision for what it could mean for El Salvador to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, to be the first country in the world to kind of lead the charge. And, we've seen it kind of play out in the dividends it's paid as the country develops and sucks in, both intellectual and monetary capital from around the world.
So your project Bitcoin Beach, Originally, I thought it was kind of just an organic notion that popped up, and people just basically Bitcoiners getting together and say, hey, why don't we just call this Bitcoin Beach? But I've come to learn it's more of an organized project. Is that right?
Yeah, so it came out of an existing project that we already had that was working in the community. And so I think we've seen, as we're working with other projects around the world, you don't need to have that, but when you have that basis, you have that existing kind of trust that you've built in the community, you have those connections, it's much easier to start something than coming in new and it's like, oh, these crazy people want us to use this money that we've heard has been used in a bunch of scams. Like, it's much easier if the people already know you, they kind of know your heart and they know what you're about. And so we always tell people, hey, if you have the opportunity to take an existing project or partner with an existing project to launch something like this, it's definitely going to make something much easier. And yeah, the idea behind the name is, I was my other business, we did a lot of stuff in the media, and so I was always thinking of things that would be, kind of grab people's attention and be easy for people to latch onto. And so we were at the beach and it was Bitcoin. I was like, Bitcoin Beach.
Awesome. And okay, so we're here now. It's 2025. We've had a few years of Bitcoin being legal tender here. And now we're at a place where geopolitically, there's some new events that have occurred, primarily with the IMF coming into El Salvador or already being here and renewing some agreements, and El Salvador taking a loan with them. Part of that loan and part of the agreement was that parts of the Bitcoin law would have to be rescinded. So number one, why do you think that was the conditions? And number two, has that impacted the circular economy here, specifically Bitcoin Beach?
Yeah, I think all of us know that the IMF does not look fondly on Bitcoin. It's not just in El Salvador. We saw that as conditions in Argentina also. I think they saw what was happening in El Salvador, and so when they did the loan in Argentina, they put that condition on. I think the IMF benefits from the existing power structure and financial system, and so I think for them, anything that challenges that is going to possibly make them no longer needed. And so I think that at a deeper level, I think you have a lot of that. I think on the surface level, you just have people, that are in the financial world, they're bankers, they tend to be more conservative. And so I think that anything that's different, or, there's been a lot of blowups in the Bitcoin space, and they may not be able to differentiate between an FTX and what Bitcoin is. And so for them, they lump it all together. And so I think that I don't think all of it is, these sinister motives, but I do think that there are, they have vested interest in keeping the system that exists now to continue, and to keep being able to shell loans out to countries that have difficulty paying them back and have to meet their conditions. And so I do think there was a control element to it. As far as, do I think it's really impacted and had a negative impact? I would say no. I think to the narrative to some extent, and that's been something that's kind of surprised me in the last few months. I've had to kind of step back and say, okay, my perspective is going to be different than other people's, because I've heard from a lot of Bitcoiners that are very disillusioned. Some that have left El Salvador, and other people that felt like they sold out and were very surprised. And for me, it wasn't a surprise. El Salvador was in a precarious financial position. They've had decades of presidents that have kind of run the country into the ground, that have accumulated debt, and this was something that Nayib inherited. It wasn't something that he caused, but it was also complicated by COVID and the shutdowns. There was definitely debt accumulated during that time, but even without that, they would have had to do some type of refinancing deal to make this work out long term. The other option was the default on the debt. And we've seen historically countries that default, it has all these knock-on effects. And so I think it would have been very unwise for El Salvador to default. So we saw a couple years ago, they actually hired a former IMF official to come in to consult for them. So it's been obvious for the last few years that even while they were talking about, basically, giving the finger to the IMF, at the same time, they're pragmatic and realistic that something had to be done. So I think they've been playing this kind of cat and mouse game. And when the IMF first came out with this, I mean, they were going to force El Salvador to roll everything back. And I think they thought they had the upper hand, that El Salvador would have to cave to whatever conditions they put on. And the president was very strategic. He just kind of kept putting them off, and he bought back debt to kind of buy him some time. He did a lot of things that allowed him to be able to negotiate on his terms, to wait for Bitcoin price to be back up. So he looked like a genius for having bought Bitcoin, because instead of, when the IMF first started pushing on this, El Salvador was really in the red on their Bitcoin purchases. And so he, waited till he was in the strong position. Also, things had shifted in the U.S. with Trump coming into power. I think that the IMF also knew, okay, we don't know what Trump's position is going to be. He's probably a president who's not going to be looked at favorably on the IMF as it is. And in the prior administration, in Trump's first term, Bukele and Trump had a very good relationship. So I think from the IMF's position, they were like, okay, we better get a deal done now. So I think at the time Bukele put this deal together, he kind of had the upper hand. The things that he agreed to didn't change anything on the ground. I mean, to not force businesses to accept Bitcoin, businesses were never being forced to accept Bitcoin. The one thing that I would have liked to have seen them not concede to was they conceded to not allowing tax payments to be made in Bitcoin. I think just from a functional point of view, as a business owner here, as somebody wanting to do projects in El Salvador, I want to do things on a Bitcoin standard. And so, I want to be able to pay my taxes in Bitcoin also. And so I think that is just going to cause a little bit of a logistical hiccup. But as far as for most people and them being able to live on a Bitcoin standard and use it in their daily life, it's easier to use Bitcoin now than it was 3 months ago, 6 months ago. It just keeps getting better as far as Bitcoin use. So yeah, I don't think it's had really any practical impact.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you brought up also the psychological impact, though, that it's had on people here, because from my vantage point, I think that what El Salvador did with the Bitcoin law, it created a signal, a beacon to Bitcoiners around the world that El Salvador was going in a different direction, one that kind of transcended the old monetary order and the fiat regime, and that they were embracing a new way of approaching governance and basically rebuilding the base layer of their society on sound principles. And so I think that's what a lot of Bitcoiners gravitated towards. And I'm not somebody who believes in a top-down approach to things, but having the government signal that they are not only not just hostile, but they're actually embracing a Bitcoin standard, I think was huge. And the IMF coming into the picture, I think, just distorted that signal. And I think that was mainly the damage that has been done, because practically everything's still the same. And I think the biggest aspect of it all is the fact that capital gains remains, there are no capital gains on your Bitcoin. And as Bitcoin appreciates, that would be detrimental to be using it as a currency. I think we're seeing that in the US and other Western countries that do tax those capital gains. So as long as that remains intact, I think that nothing really practical has changed, and except for the tax thing where you can't pay your taxes in Bitcoin. That's more of a practical function.
And in reality, that, from my experience, had not been rolled out. I mean, I have not been able to pay my taxes here.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something that they had already implemented. And I see it as something they'll probably change back down the road. So I think you saw a lot of Bitcoiners coming out, posting things on Twitter, saying, hey, Bukele, why did you cave on this? Why did you give in? You sold out. And then you saw the president coming back and saying, hey, nothing's changed. We're still buying Bitcoin. And they're like, well, you can't buy Bitcoin because the IMF agreement says you can't buy Bitcoin. And he's saying, no, we're still buying Bitcoin. We're still accumulating. And so people were trying, people were upset about that. They're like, well, somebody's lying. It's like, no, that's not how the world works. You look at IMF agreements. I was talking with a friend the other day. Me and her were just kind of laughing because you look at the other IMF agreements, they put all these conditions down, and then the countries ignore most of them, and the IMF comes in and they have a grading that, when they do their evaluations, they kind of grade where they are in compliance, and they have to hit a certain level. Usually they waive those requirements and they keep funding the governments, whether it's Argentina or, somewhere in Africa. And so Bukele's coming out saying we're going to keep buying, and people, well, how can you do it? Well, because he knows that he can push the line, but he can't come out and say, well, we don't really plan on complying with this, because he's got to allow the IMF to save face too. So he's trying to be like, hey, look, guys, this is all going to work out. We put this agreement together. We allowed them to save face. It allows us to keep going business as usual. But we've got this financing come in. We're going to be able to get our bond ratings up. The economy is powering ahead. Like, everything's blue sky ahead of us. But some of the Bitcoiners are so like tripped up and set on this. Well, what is it? Can we buy or can't buy? It's like, life's not clean like that. It's always a little messy, and they're going to push the limits.
Yeah, especially when it comes to politics too, right? That is a game where you have to have tact and strategy, and I think Bitcoin.
And you can't always say what you're going to do. Yes. You have to allow that gray area there so that the IMF can save face with their people, and that's just the reality. So when people are trying to like push, well, we want to know who's lying, who's right. It's like, you're looking at it totally wrong.
Yeah, Bitcoiners are more black and white, and where politics operates in a whole gray area from my perspective.
Yeah.
So then what does this all mean for El Salvador, for Bitcoin Beach? How do you see the future playing out here? What's your take on that, just based off what you've been seeing? Is this still Bitcoin country? Are people still coming here? Are still people investing here? And what does the future look like here?
Yeah, it's 100% still Bitcoin country. And people ask like, well, Bitcoin's it's not legal tender now. It's like, legal tender is one of those terms that nobody really knows what it means to begin with. There's lots of states in the US who have passed laws that have named gold and silver legal tender, but they don't force every business in those states to accept gold and silver. So in my mind, that's a similar thing here. Bitcoin is still legal tender. This is still Bitcoin country. You still have the most friendly administration of anywhere in the world as far as pushing Bitcoin. I mean, they're getting ready to roll out Bitcoin education in the entire public school system, like starting, I believe, in second grade, like doing it every year. They have a different program doing financial, education, but that's going to include Bitcoin and be focused on Bitcoin. And so where else in the world do you have anything like that? You have, Tether, which is, very Bitcoin friendly company. Obviously, it's not pure Bitcoin, but it's company, I believe, that's run by Bitcoiners that wants to see the freedom that Bitcoin comes like proliferate around the world. And so you have them making El Salvador their headquarters. Their net revenue in a year is twice, I think, El Salvador's total tax base. So to have a company that size that's making El Salvador home, all these, we did a podcast with Wiz from Mempool. They're getting ready to move from Japan here. You have a lot of Bitcoin companies that are flooding in, but not just Bitcoin companies that are like directly in the Bitcoin space, but Bitcoiners that own all kinds of different companies that are moving to El Salvador and kind of seeing this as their freedom play. And you have a ton of people in the decentralized health space that maybe that's more of their focus than Bitcoin, but they're very Bitcoin friendly and connected to the Bitcoin space. So you have all these different communities, I think, converging on El Salvador. And just look around. They're building everywhere. Real estate prices continue to go up. Opportunities continue you see businesses sprouting everywhere. And not just foreigners, like the locals are benefiting from this. They're starting the businesses. You're seeing Salvadorans come back from the US. I mean, to me, I get kind of surprised sometimes when I see things on Twitter, because I'm like, dude, look around. Like, things are like booming here.
El Salvador is still a developing country, though, from my perspective. And that's great for entrepreneurs. It means there's a lot of opportunity. What do you think El Salvador needs in terms of industry, in terms of businesses, in terms of services? You've been here 15 years, 20 years?
20 years, yeah.
Yeah. What would you say needs to evolve here in order for it to move up in status, and especially when it comes to lifestyle?
Yeah. I think mostly it's going to take time. I mean, that's the reality. I think for me, having been here for 20 years, just seeing in the last 5 years how crazy the shift is and how if people come now, they feel like it's kind of rustic here. I'm like, man, you should have seen it 10 years ago. Like, it's luxury now compared to then. So I think even another 5 years from now, people are going to be shocked at how far along that it's come. But the great thing is there's so much opportunity here, because the reality is the standards were kind of low in the past. And so whether it was like construction or the quality of, appliances or anything that you had, the business services, there was a lot of stuff that was lacking. Well, now you have people coming in with money. And so there's all this opportunity, whether you have, a company that makes, if you come in and want to make windows here, like there's a huge need for companies that make good windows, because most of the windows in the country are still single pane, even in new construction. Yes. And the double pane windows are crazy expensive. So if a company came in and was a good window company, I mean, painting companies, the historically painting in El Salvador, they didn't tape anything. They didn't put tarps down. They just, paint was to protect stuff. And if you got some on the ground or wherever, no big deal. Obviously, as people come in, they have different standards of aesthetics and they want sharp lines and clean paint. Like, if you're a painting company that knows how to come in and do that, you would clean up here and make a fortune. So I feel like there's all these different kind of niche opportunities. You don't have to be tech or in the Bitcoin space per se. I just think anybody who can provide great service.
Yeah. And what's been your driving force between your missions here to El Salvador and building out Bitcoin Beach and the project there and the circular economy? What would you say is driving you to do all of that?
I think, growing up as a Christian and that being kind of the driver of my life and decisions, I feel like we're here to serve others, and that it's actually through serving others that you actually find personal happiness. I think that's why we find kind of the happiest people in the world are those that are serving others. And so I think, what better place to be able to serve? And there's so much opportunity in El Salvador, and the people here are just so warm and inviting. And I just see so much hope here. And so I think for me, it just seemed like the natural place to be able to come in and participate and feel like I belong, but that also I can contribute.
And in terms of like stories where you've had an impact or where you've seen just a positive force of Bitcoin or your efforts, do you have any stories like that you could share where you've seen just some type of transformation occur?
Yeah, I don't want to take individuals by name or anything, just for their own privacy, sure. And because I haven't asked them beforehand, but a lot of their stories have already been told by people that have come down. But I would say, just kind of on a broader level, I'll take just El Zonte. Like, when we started, the vast majority of the kids never went to high school because there wasn't a local high school, and it was dangerous for them to go to the one in the local community. Now, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the kids of that age finish high school. Previously, there was nobody from the community that had gone to university. Now there's dozens that have graduated or that are in university right now. The level of businesses that we see growing, started by young entrepreneurs, even the folks that offer English classes in El Zonte now, like, they've turned it into a business. So seeing all these young people who, for them, the dream used to be to try to get illegally to the U.S. and work in some dead-end job in the U.S. Now they're dreaming about building, something in El Zonte, or not just El Zonte. This is happening all over the country. You're seeing a huge decrease in the people that leave to go to the U.S. They're seeing promise to be able to build in El Salvador. You're seeing even them telling their friends that are in the U.S., hey, you should come back. There's more opportunity here than probably your experience in El Salvador, especially if you speak English now. And so, you just see this total transformation in the mindset. It used to be people felt like life was just going to keep getting worse. Now they're just full of hope.
Yeah. That's what I felt when I first originally got here, that hope and the optimism. And it was mainly to do with the transformation that the country as a whole was going through. And being here now almost, I would say, a year and a half, on and off, right? Mm-hmm. Living here 8 months. And then before that, I traveled about 6 months every month here. I couldn't imagine what life was like with the gangs. Like, I didn't experience it at all. And it seems like it's been totally obliterated. I've never felt unsafe here, never even interacted with a gang member or anything like that. But you've been here 20 years. What's What's that transformation been like here?
It's hard to describe the people who didn't live through it, because it really was this like oppressive thing that hung over the country. Especially, there would be times where things would like get a little better and there'd be a little hope, but then the times when the murders would skyrocket, I mean, people wouldn't go out on the streets. You'd go out at night and it would be like a ghost town. I mean, everybody lived, their homes were like bunkers. They were, sending their kids to the US if they could, or out of town to, neighboring towns that had less gangs controlling them. People wouldn't send their kids to school because that was a place where, the gangs would do a lot of recruiting. And so it really felt like life was ending for the people here. I mean, I remember we had one really bad spell where we had, 3 of our neighbors were killed within a 3-week period, including the guy who lived right in front of us. I heard it. He was shot 40 times. It was just crazy. And it's now where they just recently put the Satoshi monument statue in El Zonte. I don't know if you've seen that one, that they have a similar one in Lugano. They just put it by the skate park there, but that's where the guy lived at that time. That was a little shack then at that time. And so it was this sense of like, yeah, nobody wanted to be in El Salvador. Nobody wanted to stay, and nobody thought that it could ever change. So for me to see this shift to people being full of hope, to El Salvador having a much lower murder rate than the US has, to being, the thought of having I can't remember if it was the president or one of the head guys from Costa Rica recently was here, like touring things and trying to get info from the government. That the thought of Costa Rica looking to El Salvador for advice would have been laughable 5 years ago. So just seeing that kind of shift. And then the other thing that I think a lot of people don't kind of talk about and they don't realize is how many young lives have been saved by the crackdown. And you have a lot of people focusing on, hey, there's a chance that the people that are innocent are in the jails right now. And that itself is a very complicated thing. From having been in El Salvador all these years, you realize how ingrained the gangs were in communities. And so even if you had all the facts, if you had a full-on trial, if you had, each individual person had a defense lawyer and a prosecutor, it would be very hard to untangle who should be in jail and who shouldn't, because a lot of these people were participating in things, but they were forced to participate. But then at a certain point, they were the ones forcing others to participate. There was people that did favors just out of fear of their lives or to fear for their kids. And so to even know who the victims versus the perpetrators were is almost impossible to decipher. And so I don't think it would have been possible for El Salvador to stop this kind of like continuing like pipeline of youth into the gangs without doing this major crackdown. And with that, yes, there's going to be collateral damage, but the other option was to allow this to just kind of persist for years. And so you look at, I estimate there was probably about 25,000 youth a year that were joining the gangs. So you look at that now, and it's probably in the hundreds. I mean, we're not even talking thousands. There's virtually nobody joining the gangs now because nobody wants to be part of that. They've made it so that the costs are way too high. So you look in the past 5 years, you're talking over 100,000 youth who have been kept out of that lifestyle. And so when we're weighing the cost of these things, we have to weigh what do those 100,000 lives of young people that have been saved, plus the millions of Salvadorans who now have freedom. Apologize. Sorry, I'm a little emotional about this, but the millions of Salvadorans whose lives are free now, the economic prosperity that has come. And yes, of course, any person who's wrongly imprisoned is a tragedy. And I'm not making excuses of that and saying that we shouldn't do everything that we can to stop that. But you've got to weigh these two things. And that's one thing I never hear anybody talk about, the 100,000+ kids whose lives have been saved by this. Sorry.
No worries. I really appreciate the emotion behind what you're saying, because we hear about this in the news and in headlines and in Twitter posts and so forth, but like to have someone here that actually was with these children and saw what they went through and lived through the violence and the murders here, and to see the transformation that has occurred, I think really it makes you understand it at a much deeper level. And I appreciate you for just going there and sharing that with me. And in terms of talking about the children, now we have a country here that's safe, and I think that's a huge part of rebuilding. What do you think else needs to happen? Is education a big part that needs to occur here in order to give these kids growing up now a chance at prospering with this new foundation that's been laid?
100%. The fact was, before, it was hard to encourage people to stay in school because the response is, for what? Like, there's no jobs here. There's no opportunity. Where now there's tons of opportunity. You have companies coming in. Right now, really, there's a lack of talent, especially in specific fields. And so you have this big demand and this need for educated workers in these different fields. And so now there's a driving force and a reason to motivate people to go on and get education. The proliferation of English classes and people now that we see that are learning English, that's opening job opportunities for them, not just here in El Salvador, but as global workers. And the reality is, though, like, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. Like, these things take years, if not decades, to change. And so the education system here was pretty abysmal. If you go back 5 years, they're making a bunch of changes. They're trying to renovate the schools, bring them up to better standards, bring in better teachers. But it's very hard to take something that had been in neglect for so many years, and you can't just overnight turn it into, a model school system. And so I'm actually shocked at how quickly they have been able to change things and the progress that they've been able to make. I love the things like the Bitcoin initiative of putting this education in all of the school systems here. And I think 10 years from now, you're going to look at El Salvador as a place that's doing education right. They're definitely not going down the woke path of trying to, victimize everybody and coddle people. They're saying, hey, what do we need to do to actually get educated workers who can kind of lead the country forward?
In terms of Bitcoin Beach and your mission, is education a part of it as well? And what impact has it had on the kids? I know you guys were once partnered with Hope House. Is that still the case? And what has the impact been there in El Zonte?
Yeah. So Hope House and Bitcoin Beach kind of came up simultaneously. And then over the last couple of years, we've kind of split off those efforts. Still a great working relationship, but Jorge was a very big part of Bitcoin Beach, and really this couldn't have happened without him. He wanted to really just focus more on El Zonte and the local community projects and make sure that those didn't get kind of forgotten as we expanded and did more stuff. And so it was kind of great. We kind of split the team, and they're focusing on the local initiatives, doing English classes, a lot of stuff, especially with younger kids. And then we've continued with more of the Bitcoin initiatives. A lot of them still with social components to them, but not just focused in El Zonte, focused really throughout El Salvador and then throughout the world. We're now working with probably 60 or 70 different, I've lost count, there's so many that keep popping up, but different circular Bitcoin economies around the world. And so I think, and I love how it's happened, because I think it's better than having organizations get big and kind of cumbersome and bureaucratic. It's better to have a decentralized kind of way that things happen and have certain people take on certain initiatives and other people take on others. And so we've done a number of education things. We worked with the Department of Education to develop the curriculum that they're doing in the schools. Obviously, Me Premier Bitcoin was a big part of that. And Me Premier Bitcoin, that's all they're focused on is education. And so we think that's great. It's great to have, places that are just focused on that. So I think that the key thing is to realize sometimes people like to think like, oh, well, that's competing with that. It's like, no, these are all synergistic. Like having the more, the better of these things that we can have, because there's no lack of opportunity and need out there, but there is a lack of people that are equipped to go in and meet that need.
Yeah. And, you know, getting back to the circular economy, you said you're working like 60 or 70, and, you know, you've spurred up your own Bitcoin circular economy here. And then there's Bitcoin circular economy at Berlin. And I'm sure there are other ones popping up all over the place here in El Salvador. Do you have any tips for people that want to start, you know, creating their own Bitcoin circular economy in their neighborhood, in their community?
I mean, one is to just start small. And what I always say is start small, and then whatever you think you want to do, shrink it down like to 10% of that size. Because people want to say like, oh, I want to reach my city. Like no, start in one neighborhood, because the network effect that you need with Bitcoin transactions, you need to have a hub of places where people can spend Bitcoin, get paid in Bitcoin, where people are transacting in Bitcoin. And then it's much easier if you have just one neighborhood. Then over time, it'll expand out to the rest of the town. But if you try to do the shotgun approach and get a whole city, it's never going to work, because somebody's going to use Bitcoin one time and then they never had another opportunity to use it. And so I always tell people, start small and then try to base it around some type of community project or need, and make sure that you have real ties and connection in the community, because it's going to require a lot of hand-holding. A lot of people are going to be confused. They'll think maybe it's a scam. They'll think maybe you have ulterior motives. And so you need to spend a lot of time with people and really grow that connection and that trust basis. That's why it's much easier if there's already an existing program that you kind of partner with.
And you have a podcast and a whole media studio over there at Bitcoin Beach. And over the course of us being here in El Salvador, we've had our podcast and our media projects, and it made me realize the power of media. Do you think that's an important component as well of building a Bitcoin circular economy, that media aspect?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is Bitcoin Beach never would have succeeded without the media component. And that was something that I learned from my prior business that I had in the US of just how media can drive things. And so from the early days, not that you're doing things to take a picture of it or to have videos of it, that's obviously not important. But in order to have the wider community supporting something, they have to know about it.
Yeah.
And in order for them to know about it, they have to hear about it several times. Like, just because they hear about something once, you think like, oh, but they heard a podcast that I talk about. Yeah, they've heard like 50 podcasts. But if they hear, if they hear your story 5 times, then they'll finally start to be like, oh, wow, I should check that out. And so we knew early on that having the media on our side would bring supporters in. It would bring, it would actually drive people to El Zonte, because the project of Bitcoin Beach wasn't going to work unless we drew Bitcoiners from around the world to come in, spend their Bitcoin in El Zonte, buy properties there, invest there, make that home. Like, in order to make it sustainable, we needed Bitcoin continually coming in from the outside. And so we knew to do that you need to harness media. And so you learn there's certain things. I mean, like the name of Bitcoin Beach, you got to have something that's easy, that's kind of catchy, and then have a story that's different. And so we knew that this was a story that was very different. And that's why we, 60 Minutes didn't come down because, my looks or something. Like, obviously, everybody knows that. They came down because this was this crazy story. It had nothing to do with me. It was like, wow, there's this community in El Salvador, of all places, that's like living on a Bitcoin standard. This is crazy. And so I think that it's very helpful when you have a unique story to use the media to get it out. And then those things kind of build on each other. Once one outlet picks it up, then the others do. They all follow each other. I mean, it's one of those things. Well, if they think it's a story, then it must be a story. It's like this self-validating network.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's hugely important. And to me, it's work. I don't like seeing myself on camera. It's not something I really enjoy, but I see the power and the benefit of it. And so, I always encourage people, whether you like it or not, like, you need to get the story out there. If nobody knows about your project and nobody's going to come in and spend Bitcoin there or support or get involved, it's going to be very hard for it to succeed.
Yeah, I could imagine it just stalling out. You get some vendors on board, and then
Yeah, but if nobody's spending Bitcoin, they're not going to want. I mean, and even when the media comes in that validates it to the vendors, they're like, "Oh, this is not a scam. This must be real." If you have Bloomberg here, or these, they're like, to them, it makes it more real. And so, yeah, I think it's important. It's work. That's the reality. It's work. The podcast side I love the podcast because we're not trying to monetize it. We're doing just to get a story out, and so I love that. To me, that's not work, but doing the media aspect is definitely work.
Yeah, as someone new to the camera, I understand totally where you're coming from. Now, what's the roadmap for Bitcoin Beach from here on out? Any plans?
We're really just trying to see this continue to grow worldwide. And so we don't want to lose momentum with the local projects. So we want to make sure that we, remain committed to that we have the local team that's doing that. But we're also spending a lot of our time working with, like I said, there's dozens of it could be close to 100 by now. I haven't counted recently, but of these projects all over the world. So we recently did a Bitcoin Circular Economy Summit as part of the Plan B conference that was here in January. We had people come in early from that. We had people from all over the world that came in. I think we had like 15 different circular economies that came in for that. And we'd spent a whole week doing workshops and sharing ideas. And it's not just us telling them what to do. It's us learning from what they're doing. And wow, we never would have thought about that. That's a great idea. And so to see that kind of shared knowledge in the community and to see the camaraderie that comes with that. So that's what we're spending a lot of our time now, is trying to start up these and help sustain and take to the next level these projects that can have the same impact on their countries that Bitcoin Beach had on El Salvador. Obviously, not every country is going to have a leader that's forward thinking enough that they're going to jump to adopting Bitcoin, but we help them see that in different ways they can help push their countries forward, even if it's not on the government level, but just on the the local adoption level.
Yeah. Well, I got a question for you that's a little bit out of left field, but what's the end goal? What's the big picture vision that you have for El Salvador? What would you like to see transpire? Is it everyone using Bitcoin and completely discarding the dollar? What's the final destination for your mission?
The final destination is that Salvadorans don't feel like they have to leave El Salvador, that they feel like they can be successful here, that we see it become kind of a beacon of hope for the neighbors. You see the neighboring countries kind of pick up on what's happening here and try to replicate it. As far as Bitcoin adoption, I think that's just the direction it's going to go. I don't think it matters whether we want that to happen or not. I think that's the direction the world is moving in. And, it's not going to happen overnight. It may be a decade-long thing to see the Bitcoin use here kind of dwarf the dollar usage. I mean, the dollar's been around for so long; it has the network effects. It's so entangled and everything. So I'm not naive enough to think that it's going to happen overnight. But I think 10 years from now, people will be like, "Oh yeah, most people prefer to use Bitcoin because it just works better." So that's not the end goal. The Bitcoin is the tool. The end goal is seeing families thrive.
And Bitcoin has been a major part of that, obviously. Do you think savings culture is now starting to pick up over here? Because from my perspective, this country's lived through a lot of hardship, from civil war to gang violence, and it was pretty much on survival mode. And when you're on that mode, you're just thinking about the next day, and you're not thinking about saving for the future. And so Bitcoin comes around, and it does, just by, I don't know if a better word than osmosis, right? Just by interacting with it, it transforms your mindset to one of savings and prudence and so forth. Do you see that catching hold in certain circumstances here?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to describe to somebody without them seeing the transformation that happens in a young person when they start getting paid in Bitcoin and they start for the first time in their life questioning, should I spend it now versus save it for the future? Because El Salvador had no savings culture when we started. I mean, the savings rate was probably one of the lowest in the world. And there really was this sense of like, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So might as well live for the day. You also have a lot of people that were living off remittances sent back from the US. And so the remittance culture is kind of like a welfare to some extent, because they're not working for it. It's coming from the US. I think a lot of people here don't realize how hard their family members were having to work for that money in the US. I think there was this kind of frame of mind of like, oh, you just make tons of money in the US and they're rich now and they're sending us, a little pittance down here. And so, we'll take it and go out and buy Pollo Campero or McDonald's with it rather than saving it. And so I think you had kind of a welfare mentality combined with a, hey, who knows if we're going to be alive tomorrow. So like, let's, this kind of survival mode. And now with the security aspect changing, people are thinking longer term. With Bitcoin coming in, they're thinking about the value of money for the first time. They're realizing that there's an opportunity cost of spending today versus saving for the future. But also you see they actually believe there's a future here in El Salvador. So they want to save so they can buy property, so they can invest in a business. You just look around. I mean, all the businesses are making improvements to their infrastructure, bringing in new equipment, signage. Like, people believe there's a future here. And so that may not be like bank savings like we think about traditionally, but investing in a business is one of the best savings modes that you can have. And so, yeah, we're definitely seeing that shift.
Mike, is there anything else you want to cover here in this conversation? Anything else you want to say?
I mean, just that people should come to El Salvador and check things out. I'm curious what's been your perspective on coming down here and operating a business. What do you see as the biggest challenges that El Salvador still has in kind of attracting entrepreneurs and people from around the world? And do you see that causing any rub with locals feeling like, hey, now El Salvador is successful, so why are foreigners coming in and taking our jobs? Which they're not. They're usually creating jobs, and people don't, but that's natural. I think sometimes we see the same thing in the U.S. where people feel like, oh no, this pie is only so big. If somebody else comes in, they're going to get part of my piece, rather than seeing like, no, we're making the whole pie bigger. So I'm just curious as to what you're seeing as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think El Salvador is a place with just plenty of opportunity and a forward-thinking leader that is clearing the path as best as he can in order to build up this country. And so we've seen now companies move into space like Tether, and we see people from all around the world moving to El Salvador with their hopes and dreams. And even, the billionaires. I was talking to someone the other day, and he said, maybe in the past, 1 or 2 billionaires came into the country a year.
Yeah.
And we just had a meeting over here where it was 50 plus.
I mean, I think I've met or had lunch or dinner with like 5 or 6 billionaires like in the last couple of years. I've never met a billionaire in my life. I've probably never been in the same room with a billionaire, and never would have thought El Salvador would be the place where you would like come in contact with these people.
Yeah. And so in that regard, there's a lot of energy moving here. However, after a year and a half of being here, it comes with its challenges. As I mentioned, it's been 40, 50 years that El Salvador has been in the dark. It isn't developed in ways where a person who is used to creature comforts would experience that throughout the country, right? I mean, you have your pockets where it's affluent and stuff like that. And if you can live in that area and build your life around there, you could perhaps find the amenities and the comforts that would make you feel comfortable. The way I describe it is, if you're coming here to build, it's the right time. And if you're coming here for comfort, you still got a decade or two out before it gets to that level. And so it really depends on the mindset. But if you come here with the entrepreneurial mindset, there's a lot of growth to be had. And I think that it's going to be discovered just like any gold rush. And right now it's those early days where you can really take advantage of it. I mean, just in the little time that I've been here, we got here and hit the ground running, and we were able to make a big impact really fast and create a lot of media publicity and stuff like that. And that's because in the way we were doing it, there wasn't a lot of people doing it that way. And so it's easy to carve out your niche here really quick. Like you said, somebody coming here and wanting to do quality construction, they're going to stand out. Somebody coming here and wanting to do quality dental care, they're going to stand out. And I think over time, what you're going to see happen is that the standards are just going to raise just through free market competition. I think it's important also that there's a boon there for El Salvadorians to also rise as the country does. And I haven't felt any animosity. It's only been friendliness towards me. But at the same time, I'm not competing with them at a level where I'm building a business that actually, participates in the local economy at a very observable way, I'm curious, though, has there been criticisms for your project and Bitcoin? I know here the sentiment is mixed between Bitcoin. And so wondering what kind of blowback, if any, you've gotten.
There's always the criticism that, Bitcoin is pushing gentrification. You have people coming in with money and it's pushing people out. I think anytime you have like development and things come in, there's going to be losers and winners in that. Overall, the society wins, but you're going to have some people that are negatively impacted. And so I think it's important as this development happens that the government protects people that may be on the losing end of that, and that they need to make sure they keep the population on board, that they're excited about what's happening here. And I think Bukele does a great job with that. I watch him kind of zigzag. I think he's a very free market, but then he knows sometimes like, hey, the free market adaptation is going to be painful. And sometimes we need to, make sure that people know that we care about them. So he'll make some populist, moves like paying for people's electric and water bills for a month, which I don't think that's a bad thing, but it's not necessarily like the thing that I think is going to help the country long term, but it helps keep the people on board and them feeling like they're participating in the growing wealth and opportunity here. And so I think he's very in tune with that aspect of the importance of keeping the people on board. And overall, I'd say like I haven't seen that. I think the people are very welcoming of foreigners. They're very glad that people actually want to be in El Salvador. Overall, that level is very hospitable. My concern is longer term, as I think El Salvador is going to continue to suck in people from around the world. So it's very important that we see the Salvadorans succeeding, and really they have the competitive advantage. They have home field advantage. They have a lot of advantages. The foreigners a lot of times have different mindset, or can kind of see different product or different opportunities there. And so I think the two can kind of push each other to both bring the game up to a different level. And so that's kind of what I hope to see. The other thing that I've seen, and I'm trying to decipher like where this comes from, because I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we're like, it almost feels like there's bear market vibes in the Bitcoin community in El Salvador right now. And I don't know, obviously price has been kind of stagnant, but it's still, we're far from a bear market. But part of it is probably, the people a little bit disillusioned with the IMF thing. But the thing that's been the most disheartening for me is it feels like there's like some different camps now in El Salvador, in the Bitcoin community. And so a lot of times I don't even know about these divisions, and they put me in one camp or another that I don't even know about because I was talking to somebody, so I must be against them or something. I'm like, but I think that's unfortunate because there's so much opportunity here, and somehow I get drug into a lot of these things. And the reality is they never have anything to do with Bitcoin. They're almost always like personal beefs, and Bitcoiners are very ideological and they see everything black and white, and not just when it comes to Bitcoin, when it comes to their personal stuff too. And so that's one thing I hope that people can kind of take a step back and realize like, hey, the other Bitcoiners here, they're not competitors. They're not enemies. We don't have to be best friends, but we all have the same goal. We want to see El Salvador succeed. And so the kind of tribalism and we're talking within the Bitcoin camp. I mean, these are all people that we're not talking about people not wanting scammers and stuff to come in. We're talking about core Bitcoiners that don't like each other and are fighting each other about stuff that has nothing to do with Bitcoin. So that I would like to see stop, so we could just have everybody focus on the end goal.
Yeah, I think that's just an aspect of human nature, and the fact that the Bitcoin community here is pretty small and everyone knows each other, to a good degree. You go to the same meetups and you see them in El Salvador in general is not a big country. So
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those things. As the Bitcoin community here grows, that will start to dissipate and won't be as loud, because everyone will find their own place within the whole Bitcoin ecosystem itself. But you opened up a can of worms here. I'm curious here. What else are you concerned about as El Salvador evolves? Because the way I see it right now, it's almost like a blank canvas. You look at the beach and the coastline, even that is really underdeveloped. And I know some people are worried about, the coastline overdeveloping with huge condos and high rises and stuff like that as the next 20, 30 years progress. Do you see that happening? Do you have any reservations about that? Or is this just the inevitable path of development for countries that want prosperity?
Yeah, that brings up an issue that is close to my heart, because I really wrestle through this, because what we're seeing in El Zonte right now, in fact, around my house where I've lived for the past 20 years, I recently moved, and now it's the Bitcoin Beach offices, but we literally have towers circling like on 270 degrees. There's 4 towers, 7, 8, I think 7 or 8 stories that are built around. So it's totally changed the feeling and the sentiment of it. I feel like it's lost some of its character, specifically in that one area. El Zonte as a whole, I still feel like still has its character. So I'm very much pro development. I think it's important that we support development, because that brings in opportunities for the locals. Sometimes you have some of the people who speak out the most against development are the foreigners who've been living there for a while. Because it's like, well, I found my slice of paradise, so I want to shut the door and nobody else come in. And it's like, yeah, that's because you earned your money in the U.S. and you can live here relatively cheap, and you're not trying to make a living here. And the locals are living in poverty, and so it works for you, but it's not working for the locals. So I think that's what's most important, is we find something that works for the locals. I would like to see them have some stipulations to make sure that we don't, totally change the character of the community, because I feel like El Zonte in the long term has more development potential if it retains its character. If it loses its character and just becomes a bunch of towers, nobody's going to want to go there. It loses its specialness. Right now, the hotels can charge a premium, the restaurants can charge a premium because everybody wants to be there. But if they destroy that, it's not going to benefit anybody. So I would love to see there to be continued development and investment, but for them to figure out a way to do it in a way that doesn't wreck the beauty of the place.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know about your viewpoints, but I'm more libertarian leaning, and being here has challenged me in a number of ways. Number one, well, actually, let's get to, are you more of a libertarian leaning mindset?
I'm definitely more of a libertarian, and to kind of maybe jump ahead of you a little bit, but like, yeah, people should be able to do what they want with their land. But then when you see somebody puts a tower next to your place and you can't even see the sun anymore, that's affecting your property too. So it makes you kind of question, okay, where is that give and take, and what role is there for government?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting at. Not only that, but you see Bukele, the strong man, strong leader, who's basically imposing power in a way that like uplifts his people. And so that makes you question, okay, is there a place for state power on that level? And then you live here and you just kind of go through the challenges of living in a country that's on the rise. And you realize, oh man, okay, I see why they might have zoning laws where you can't throw a concert in a residential neighborhood, which you get over here,
yeah,
and stuff like that. So I've now become, my views have become a little bit more open to the idea of, some sort of regulation in order to maintain a certain vision that you have for the, the community in general. And so it sounds like you've gotten there a little bit too.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a developer that specialize in communities of libertarians. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have stuff in Belize and Honduras and Nicaragua, and he said like everybody comes in. They don't want any homeowners association. They don't want any restrictions of what they can do on their land until they live in a community where there's no restrictions on what people can do. And then they're like, hey, we should have some sound ordinances that you can't have noise after this, or, well, he shouldn't be able to open a business right next to my, my house where he's got delivery trucks at 6 a.m., beep, 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 backing in to deliver, so it's challenging because I'm very much wired as libertarian, and I like recoil when somebody says I need even to get a permit for something. And so, but then you see like, okay, there is a reason, and I feel like it's overdone in the US and a lot of places it kind of takes on a life of its own, but there is some role for those things. Even here, there's properties where, just figuring out, hey, how can we pave this road? And you realize it's very hard to get neighbors to come together. And so what usually happens is a few people pay for it and the rest people free ride on it and benefit from it. And so for the state to come in and do something and require everybody to pay taxes for it and everybody to pay, I'm not saying I'm a proponent of that, but you kind of see both sides to it.
Yeah, the coordination mechanism is hard to solve, and it seems like the state evolved for that reason, and it's kind of hard to get away from, especially given human nature. But thinking about other ways of creating a community and a society and kind of instilling your values into it. We have Murph's Life over here, and I'm wondering your thoughts on projects like that, which are actually looking to build a community that is forward thinking, but also really thinking about the locals as well and how to integrate them into that.
No, I love the heart behind what they're doing, and it's going to be beautiful when they finish the hotel and restaurant there. It's in practice, it's always a lot more challenging than in theory. And I've had talks with them about this. As they've had, you've got to be very careful as you bring people in. People sometimes start to expect things very quickly if you do nice things for people, and I think that's just human nature. And so you don't want to create a community of people where, they have this, sense of entitlement. And so that's always the challenge, is like, how do you come in and lift people up, but without creating an undue sense of entitlement and, creating a mess of it.
Yeah. And then on the opposite, without creating a rift too.
Yeah. So it's very, very challenging. I mean, doing community work and community projects is very slow and tedious. And I mean, nobody who's in it has done it perfectly. They'll all tell you all the mistakes that they've made, and you're never going to make everybody happy either. That's I think that's where the saying "no good deed goes unpunished" come from, is people coming in for things like that, because you'll always have people that are unhappy that, well, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? I mean, we had some crazy guy that was messaging me every day for a while. It was like, well, you're not helping the community. You haven't built a hospital yet. I was like, what?
Wow.
You should build a hospital. That's great. Like, we would love to like support you. Like, do it. Like, what do you mean? We never claimed to build a hospital. Like, so it's you just have to go in it with the mindset that like, it's going to feel thankless a lot of times, that people are going to complain about things that they're benefiting from. And that's just human nature. That's not Salvadorans. That's just humans.
Well, with that said, I will say that I'm very much appreciative of your efforts. Bitcoin Beach was my gateway to El Salvador, as it was for many people. Chimbera and Paco and all of your guys there did an amazing job at welcoming us.
Amazing team. I mean, they are literally like, they're the ones that drive everything forward. It's amazing.
So I would say you're doing a fantastic job at community building. And thank you so much for all the support you've given us here at Sovereignty Studios and just pushing the Bitcoin mission forward. Like I said, I look at you as a legend, someone who, saw an opportunity, took it and ran with it and created a whole movement. And just want to say thank you. And thank you for coming on too.
No, thanks for the invite. I'm stoked. I got to see your studios, and yeah, and you guys have the best hats out there. So,
All right. Thanks, Mike.